everyone. I'm Anthea Mulakala, and I'm the co-lead of the Asia Foundation's Future Skills Alliance. Today, I want to talk to you about an urgent need, future-proofing skills in the Asia-Pacific region. At the Asia Foundation, we are committed to delivering future skills at scale to underserved communities. We foster collaboration between governments, private companies, and nonprofit organizations, harnessing collective resources to amplify our impact and reach those disproportionately impacted by the digital revolution. One persistent issue we face is the global gender gap in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In the Asia-Pacific region, this lack of gender equity is most apparent in engineering and information technology education, where only 21% and 29% of tertiary graduates are women. To address this, we have created the STEM ConnectHER program. This initiative supports and empowers young women, fostering diversity and inclusion in STEM through mentoring, learning responses, and a peer-to-peer regional community of women in STEM. Here's how we're making a difference. First, we're investing in the future. STEM ConnectHER prepares young women for careers in critical fields, driving innovation and economic growth. Second, we're bridging the gender gap. We're tackling the underrepresentation of women in STEM, creating a more equitable and diverse workforce. Third, we're nurturing talent. We recognize the immense potential of young women in STEM and provide them with the resources and support to succeed. And we're building a pipeline. STEM ConnectHER inspires and motivates young girls to pursue STEM education and careers, ensuring future generations of women leaders. Join us in our mission to empower women in STEM. Together, we can build a more equitable future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arina Dafir, Community Affairs Manager for Microsoft. We're excited to be part of this important initiative because closing the STEM gender gap is a significant step towards a more equitable society. It is our hope that through this program, we help knock down barriers for young women to thrive in a STEM career through access to mentorship, training, and networking. For young women considering a career in STEM, my advice would be keep an open mind. There are multiple pathways to enter, explore, and be successful in this field.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deepti Skaria from Evolve Careers. It's great to see you all here, whether you're joining in between classes or winding down after work. We're really glad you made time to be a part of today's session, preparing for a multi-generational workplace brought to you through STEM ConnectHER. To begin, I'm going to hand over to Nadia Subramaniam from the Asia Foundation, who will share an overview of the program and the broader context for today's session. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you, Deepti. And welcome to everyone who's here to join us for today's first speaker series of 2025 and for STEM ConnectHER. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nadia. I'm the director of the Future Skills Alliance, in which STEM ConnectHER is one of our flagship programs. So for some of you who may not know a little bit about the Asia Foundation, the Asia Foundation, we are an international development organization with a presence in 20 countries across the Asia and the Pacific. Our focus areas include supporting education, especially empowering women and expanding economic opportunity. There is this recognition that there is, in general, a skills gap, a digital skills gap, and we have a common goal between the corporates, the governments, communities, and academia to develop these future skills in the workforce. And that's where the Future Skills Alliance comes in. The Future Skills Alliance is a collective impact platform for public and private partnership to deliver future skills at scale across the region. We work together with corporates, including some corporates like Microsoft. We've worked with Visa and Cisco. And what we do is we create relevant, tailored programs that manage to address any of the gaps and try to improve the outcomes of women and girls and other parts of community. Some programs we have include Accelerate My Business that focuses on women MSMEs. We have the STEM ConnectHER program that you'll have a little bit of experience getting to know a little bit today, and Skills to Work. The STEM ConnectHER program involves a lot of different there are different parts of the program, including regional mentoring, industry speaker series, peer-to-peer networking. We also have workplace tours, learning resources, and you along the way collect certificates and badges. In 2024, we had a great year, reaching out to more than 2,000 participants with 47 in-person events. This also enabled us to have 14 webinars, of which we're having our first one for this year today. Last year, our focus was in 5 countries: Singapore, Malaysia, Korea, India, and Japan, where we worked with academic partners and also partners on the ground. Virtually, we work a lot with TEDx and Evolve Careers. And thank you so much, Deepti, for joining us today. So for those of you who are interested, please take a minute to join our network. You can join the platform in order to get access to the virtual programs. So thank you so much for your attendance today, and looking forward to the exciting webinar ahead. Deepti?
Thank you so much, Nadia. Now to dive into today's session. We've all seen the headlines about Gen Z in the workplace, some funny, some frustrating, most missing the real story. The truth is, for the first time ever, 5 different generations are working side by side. So that brings both challenges and huge opportunities. So whether you're a student preparing to enter the workforce or a woman early in your STEM career, you're stepping into a world that's not only fast-paced and tech-driven, but also incredibly diverse in how people think, work, and lead. Learning how to navigate and thrive in that space is just as important as any technical skill you bring to the table. That's why I'm so glad that we've got Allan Ang with us today. Allan has led HR and talent teams across Asia, Europe, and the UK at global brands like Estee Lauder, Visa, Vodafone, KFC, and he's seen these shifts up close. Not just in hiring early career talent like many of you, but also in helping companies and leaders adapt to a whole new way of working. So he'll be sharing practical tools and insights to help you make sense of the multi-generational workplace and show how you can use it to your advantage as you build your career. As you're listening, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A section as they come to you. So that way you won't forget them, and we'll make sure to cover as many as we can during the Q&A at the end. Allan, over to you.
Thank you, Deepti. Thank you, Nadia. There's just such amazing work that you guys do in the STEM ConnectHER and the Asia Foundation. I'm just trying to share my presentation. So if you just give me all a second, please tell me what you can see. Yeah. So I'm just trying to figure this out. Give me a second. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
And you're hearing me okay, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, give me 1 second. Technical issues. You bear with me a second, sorry. Okay, so hi everyone, and hello from Singapore, and hello to you around the Asia region. I'm really privileged to be speaking to you all as female students and future leaders either in or recently graduated from STEM. And I firstly want to flag something up front to you all. I'm acutely aware it's a little bit awkward. I'm not Gen Z, and I'm talking a lot today about you all, about Gen Z. So I'm not an expert, but I'm someone who's learning about this subject all the time and still learning every day. But I'm going to talk in very general terms with very general trends and from my own personal experience about your generation, Gen Z. And so the disclaimer here is that this does not mean that you and your generation are all the same. You know, we're all individuals and we're all deeply complex. And so please understand, some of what I cover may not apply to you specifically. And I've been working with many companies, Visa, Estee Lauder, etc. We've been struggling with integrating new graduates and Gen Z into the workplace. This is seen as a really big challenge for companies. And I'm going to share some insights about the challenges from a company point of view, but also some insights and some advice about how you can all thrive in the workplace. And my aim is to help sort of develop more awareness, knowledge, and empathy, curiosity about this challenge. Okay, so I want to share a little bit about me firstly. So outside of work, I'm super passionate about travel. That's myself and loved ones in various places around the world, New Zealand, my sister's wedding in Italy last summer, in Japan. And the picture at the bottom right is earlier this year in Iceland, which is like minus 15 degrees. I have never, even though I'm from England and England's very cold, I've never experienced cold like that. And I actually flew directly from Singapore to Iceland, which was the weirdest experience because Singapore, for those of you who know, is like a frying pan. It's like super hot, and then I went from the frying pan to the freezer. So that was a bit of a weird experience, I've got to say. And I've still got sort of nightmares thinking about it. But listen, I'm talking about my career. I've had a 20-year career in kind of corporate HR roles, with around the last 15 years being in leadership positions. I've worked, as you can see, for several global brands, and one core theme of my background is I've kind of designed, built, and run those kind of ecosystems in companies that hire and develop future leaders. And the work I've done is kind of seen thousands of people hired, thousands of people progress their careers. I'm also a career coach, and I sit on the advisory board of the University of Sussex Business School. And I'm really passionate about giving back and helping others in their careers. And recently, I started a careers channel on Instagram and TikTok, where I post kind of 1-minute career tips videos. The channel is really targeted at early in career people like yourself. So please feel free to subscribe. And I've got a QR code there and for the Instagram if you do wish to follow me. I wanted to share a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this topic. So there's new insights and evidence and emerging trends coming through all the time on Gen Z. But from what's being reported, your generation, or Gen Z, is shaping up to be the biggest generational shift we've ever seen in history. And it sounds like a big claim, but I really do believe that's probably the case. It's even impacting countries with deep cultural traditions of conformity, like Japan. And I believe we have some people from Japan on the call, so hopefully you'll tell me if you agree or disagree. But Japan, as many of you will know, is a very, very conformist society. And it's not that there weren't previous generational differences, but Gen Z is the first generation who is not acquiescing. Previous generations in the workplace were working long hours, not being very happy at work, or typically not complaining, just taking it. But this Gen Z generation is different. They're voting with their feet, they're complaining, and that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It is what it is. And if you look at the bottom right there, a couple of pictures in the bottom right, that's me running, integrating Gen Z into the workplace workshop for the KFC Japan business, which I delivered to around 30 senior leaders in that business. The intent behind it was to help people managers manage Gen Z better. And then this training has actually been rolled out to all the people managers in the company. And so a bit of background to the KFC Japan business and this workshop. It came out of a plea for help from KFC Japan. This is a multi-billion-dollar business, just so you know. It's KFC's third biggest business globally. 1,300 restaurants, 50,000 staff, and around 95% are Gen Z. So this is a problem or challenge they really need to solve. And I've received a lot of feedback from leaders. They're finding it really difficult to hire, retain, engage, make their staff happier. They're finding a lot of challenges. And from the manager's perspective, they were saying, oh, Gen Z are entitled, they're lazy, they don't want to work hard. As we go through the slides, I'll try and share a few more anecdotes. But one thing I'd like to share with you is that from the start of the workshop to how we ended it, the leaders started the workshop in a very different mindset and mentality. We surveyed them beforehand, got on their feedback. Many of them started from a place of judgment, a lack of awareness, and frustration. But by the end, they had some ideas, some solutions, some awareness, some empathy, and importantly, some humility. And that's really one of the biggest shifts I think we need to make, which I'll be going through in the next couple of slides. So quickly, I want to share with you some hopes for this session. I hope we agree this is incredibly important for everyone, not just only for yours and your generations, but for employers as well as society as a whole. We need to help generations, the 5 generations of the workplace, work with more harmony and more cohesiveness. I'm hopeful by the end of today's session, I'll be able to equip you some ideas and concepts of how to prepare for and be successful in a multi-generational workplace. And my hope is that you take something small away, even if it's small. So over the next 35 minutes or so, we're going to cover what I see as the stakeholder needs across the 3 parties. So the way I'm thinking it conceptually in my mind, there's 3 parties here. There's more, but there's 3 main parties. There's the Gen Z employee who's coming into the workplace. There are people managers who are managing everyone, including Gen Z employees, and then there's the company as a whole. But for today's session, I'll focus mainly on 2 topics, right? First is the mindset shift I think we need to cultivate and promote in people, particularly in people in the workplace and in people managers, particularly people managers as well. And I'll close off by sharing some tips and some concepts and ideas for how you can prepare for the workplace and how to thrive when you get there. So a little bit on the current picture with your generation, Gen Z. As of this year, Gen Z makes up about a quarter of the global workforce. So very significant, but about 18% of the US labor force. By 2030, Gen Z is going to make up almost a third of the US labor force. And a couple of other stats, 60% of Africa is under 25 years old. In many countries, Gen Z experience around double the unemployment rate. And in the UK, they miss an average of 1 workday per week due to mental health struggles. And this is a huge issue, not just for workplace productivity, but for society as a whole. And when we look at the trends, there are clear challenges and opportunities that we see with you and your peers. I mean, your peers tell us they have a higher intolerance for inefficiency and poor user experience. Unfortunately, not many workplaces are equipped to meet current Gen Z expectations when it comes to technology and process efficiency. But there's a good opportunity here. With your generation being digital natives, there is an opportunity for workplaces to utilize you to accelerate digital and AI adoption. So this is a great opportunity we have in front of us. Your generation typically desire greater flexibility and work-life balance, and they'll leave if they don't receive this from an employer. But this does also give employers the opportunity to build healthier, more balanced workplaces. And we know your generation has a much greater focus on mental health. And with that push, there's an opportunity to make much more inclusive work environments. And we also know your generation wants greater career mobility, fast promotions, access to senior leaders. And the challenge is this is quite hard to achieve with how many companies are set up culturally and structurally. But this is pushing many companies to reimagine their existing processes and norms around how long it takes to get promoted, or enabling different types of movement to different types of role. And I think this is a really good thing. So look, I'm very aware, like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I'm telling you about Gen Z when you're all Gen Z, so you're going to know much more than me. So I'd love to kind of see or hear in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with this? Does this resonate with you? If it does, give us a thumbs up, or share your agreement or disagreement in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Okay. So one more thing I wanted to share. When I was at Estee Lauder companies, for example, we were experiencing quite high attrition in our Gen Z employees. And I looked into the reasons why. We found a lot of our younger employees were unhappy with how long it took to get promoted. And they were basically leaving to go and work for other companies they felt they could get them promoted more quickly. So we actually went about redesigning some of our grades at junior levels. So instead of like big jumps every 2 or 3 years, we sort of created smaller jumps. So it allowed for kind of sort of promotions after kind of 1 year or so at the more junior level. And that's one of the changes we had. And we actually saw some good results as a result of that. Okay, so we are seeing major barriers between the Gen Z lens and the employer lens. And, from your generation's point of view, Unfortunately, with what's being reported and discussed, unconscious bias does box you in, or box people in, shall I say, including yourselves, whether it's how others judge you and your peers, as well as sometimes, to be fair, sometimes Gen Z or your peers will judge other generations and how they think. So there's a kind of an empathy gap at the moment. You and your peers are more likely to feel burnout and stress from work versus other generations, but you also have a lack of job opportunities and financial security, given the kind of economic times we've been living in. Your generation wants clearer development pathways, but from the employer point of view, they often question the loyalty and motivation of Gen Z and feel that their demand for progression is unreasonable or too fast versus the experience they have. And also, there is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, there's a perception that Gen Z are entitled and difficult to work with. So, how do we go about breaking these barriers between Gen Z and the employer? So this is the three-party model which I've designed, and I kind of want to walk you guys through it. But when I think, when we think about Gen Z integrating well into the workplace, I think there's three key stakeholders, as you can see here on the page. Each of these stakeholders has their own needs, drivers, and perspectives. And part of why we have such a big challenge on integrating Gen Z is the lack of awareness and empathy, each other's needs. But in order to get to empathy, we first need to develop awareness of each party's expectations. So, starting with the Gen Z employee, we know your peers want to be treated as individuals and often want employers and managers to flex to your individual needs. Gen Z want to work for purpose-led companies with good social conscience and typically want to work contracted hours only and many other things which we discussed in the previous slide. Moving on to the manager, having worked with countless managers in my career, this is very typical of your typical people manager. And they're likely to be older millennials or Gen X, right? Like myself. And their philosophy of how they treat people will be typically to treat others how they themselves like to be treated. So it's a different philosophy. They would expect employees to fall into line. And you've got to understand, they grew up in a time which was more conformist, where fairness was about treating everyone the same, everyone consistently. So that's what's very different about the way they think. They value hard work and productivity, including working outside of hours when it's necessary. You've got to understand, when they started their career, this is what's normal for them. And they value loyalty to the company because that's the environment they've grown up in. And also what's in conflict with Gen Z expectations is they want to promote people only with a good 2 to 3 year track record of delivering results consistently. Again, this is how it was when they grew up in their careers. They got their head down, they worked hard, they delivered results, they were not always happy, and they stuck at it, and then they got promoted, maybe after every 2 or 3 years. That was the world they grew up in. So it's actually sometimes quite hard for them to understand and empathize with employees who want to get promoted after 12 months. They often will rush to judgment and go, oh, this person's entitled. This person doesn't know how it is. And that's kind of the judgment you get from many people managers who manage Gen Z. And moving on to the employer, they want a workforce that can be empathetic to their client base. So that means they ideally need a workforce broadly representative of their client demographics. So they need and want a multi-generational workplace. They want employees to operate in a collaborative way, and they want a merit-based organization that drives great results. They also want to retain and engage their employees, which doesn't just make the workplace happier, it drives better results. So the key, as I see it, is it's critical for these three stakeholders to develop awareness and empathy for one another's needs and to proactively and on an ongoing basis align to drive the best outcomes to meet each other's needs as best as possible. Now, where I think there is significant crossover between three parties, and I think we all agree on this, is we all want to be empathized with, we all want to feel included, and we all want to know that if we give something, we get something back. Quid pro quo. So when I think about this from the HR lens, the employer to employee promise has to work. So what I mean by that is, as an employer, I promise to pay you fairly, provide you with an inclusive work environment where you can fulfill your potential, and you promise to give me great productive output. And as I mentioned there earlier, there's a big alignment in efficient technology tools and processes. So how do we go about ensuring and driving workplace harmony at an individual level and a team level, including you all as students who are going to enter the workplace in the next couple of years? So I believe we need to shift our mindsets to drive multi-generational harmony. This is my framework for how we drive success. First, we need to build awareness of generational trends, right? But then we need to break the stereotypes and bias because it doesn't apply to everyone. And we are all multifaceted, intersectional people, right? We also need to cultivate and promote curiosity, which I have stated as learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, to unlearn is the hardest of all three to do. As human beings, we generally find it very, very, very difficult to unlearn, all of us. But that is something that we necessarily have to try and do. And unlearning will help us reduce bias, remove barriers, and just empathize and listen better to others. And we need to approach others with humility, empathy, and active listening skills to speak less and listen more. The sooner we can cultivate this, the mindset shift, the better we can integrate and drive harmony. So the next couple of slides are going to unpack this a little bit more, right? So we need to build generational awareness, but this is just the starting point. To truly connect across generations, we need to promote and develop empathy and curiosity and get to know one another at a deeper level as individuals. So for example, this is not exhaustive, asking questions which we generally care about and listen to, such as, what was it like growing up for you? What shaped your values and perspectives? Why do you see the world the way you do? Why do you have your values? If we can develop more curiosity and more empathy, that's how we get to a better place. Now, if I was doing a full workshop with you, or basically, I would be running through a load of slides about the different generations, and we'd be talking around why the generations are the way they are, so we can start to develop more awareness and then eventually more empathy. But I'm not going to cover this with you today, but just to give you a teaser so you can see that. Now, bias is a huge one. Again, in the full workshop, we'd unpack this in a lot more detail, right? I'm sure you're all very aware of bias, but I'm going to just give a very, very quick overview. I believe bias is so important, not just in training, but actually having active and proactive conversations and self-reflection to build self-awareness about our own biases, which we all have, and I have tons, right? Every single human has got tons of biases. We just have to build awareness and understanding of them. So examining our biases is really critical. As we know, unconscious bias can alter our behaviors and attitudes and decision-making. And bias, as I see it, is one of the biggest barriers to unlocking workplace harmony. So tackling this is a critical component for how to solve this challenge. In spite of the fact I've either been through or led bias training multiple times, I've always found it a really good reminder, and I always go, oh, damn, I'm sort of slipping into this bias, or I've developed a new bias. And this is what it's a journey that never ends, and you have to be challenging yourself constantly and reflecting constantly around your own biases. Where I see bias training is not very effective is when it's done in isolation, where some companies see it as like a tick box exercise. It's not a good way of doing it. It needs to be kind of an ecosystem response. So kind of cultivating an inclusive environment where we can regularly discuss topics such as inclusion and bias helps create better understanding and empathy between different groups of people, and is powerful and drives genuine change when it's done really well, which I've seen it done well in a few companies. So curiosity is another key component in shifting mindsets. So I've defined this as the practice of learning about different generations and trends, but then we unlearn our own biases and patterns and behaviors and prejudgments about different generations. And then we relearn by actively seeking perspectives from other people, challenging our existing views, and understanding people as individuals, and therefore in the process growing ourselves. And one thing also I want to say here is generational dynamics are evolving. Dynamics are evolving all the time. So what works today may not apply in the future. I'll give you an example of this. Whilst I was at Visa, because I left Visa in 2020, but whilst I was at Visa, there was so much hype and discussion about millennials, right, at the time. They were like, the millennials were lazy, entitled, difficult to work with. That was the hype that was going around. And nowadays, no one talks about millennials that way. No one does, right? And my take on it is that, yes, the Gen Z challenge, if you like, has overshadowed that sort of perceived challenge of millennials. But over time, what's happened is millennials have just assimilated more and more into the workplace and just become different even themselves from when they entered the workforce. So it's really important that we individually keep abreast of generational dynamics as they evolve, and then we need to keep relearning to stay relevant. And finally, we need to practice active listening and relearn how to engage with empathy by listening to understand, not to respond. So this is a big one because I think humans massively struggle with humility, right? If you ask any human being, how are you empathetic? They'll say, yeah, they are. They are. I mean, I think that most human beings are not as empathetic as they think they are. But generally, as humans, we are. But if you ask most humans, are you humble? A lot of them will say they are, but I don't think they really are. I think humility is a huge one. So being truly humble is another mindset we really need to push and cultivate. So humility starts with an acceptance that some of what we think, some of our pre-existing views may not be true, right? Some of the things you believe today that you strongly believe might not be true. So humility gives us the space to others to share their experience and insights without judgment. And it helps us shift our mindset from teacher to learner. Listen more, speak less, to truly assume that we can learn something from every single person we speak to. So what is empathy? And empathy is very simple, right? It's just the act of taking someone else's perspective. And I love this Satya Nadella quote. And Satya Nadella is the CEO of Microsoft. So before I read the quote, some background on Satya. He came in, the company was not doing well. He's really, in his time, accelerated the growth of Microsoft, the share price, the market capital. Microsoft is seen as a much better company to work for, to buy from, to work, to partner with, as a result of his leadership. And a key part of how he did this was to make empathy a core part of their strategy, from how they developed their products, where they went to market, how they managed and engaged their employees, how they work with suppliers. They just drove empathy as a key initiative. And this quote is very simple. Most people think empathy is something you reserve for a friend or family, but the reality is an existential business priority. And active listening, which is something, again, I think not that many people do well. And I have to admit, I sometimes struggle with it myself. It's super important in building trust and empathy. I'd like to play a bit of an amusing video for you all.
Alan, we can't hear it. The audio.
Ah, you can't hear it.
No.
Ah, okay. I'll tell you what. In the interest of time, I'm just not going to play the video, but I would encourage you to seek the video out. I'll describe the video, but basically in the video is different types of bad listening, which we all do, right? One of the classic ones is someone speaking to you and you're on your phone. You're like, yeah, and you're pretending to listen, but you're not really listening. You're not giving them eye contact. You're not actually listening to what they're saying. You're not observing the body language. And there's many different ways that we as people don't listen properly, right? And this video is just a bit of a funny skit to show many of the ways that we as human beings don't listen. These days, there's a lot around on our phone. Well, often we're having a conversation with people and we're trying to get on Instagram or TikTok or do an email at the same time. So that's the one thing I wanted to share. But I think you guys get the idea that listening to respond. So just to make sure you've got to truly listen to understand and not to respond. So we don't have much time to show this, but again, this is a great scene. If you want to see a great example of active listening and empathy in action, go and watch this scene from Tom Hanks' movie called A Man Called Otto. And it's a scene in a cafe. You can find it on YouTube. And it's a beautiful example of what is real active listening and empathy in action. I'd strongly encourage you guys after this to go and watch this video so you can see what it looks like. So I know this sounds obvious, but so many leaders I've worked with and so many employees struggle to genuinely listen to each other, right? To really listen and care and show they give a crap about the other person. And in my experience, it's a skill that often gets worse as you get older. And especially in our modern lives, we're busy and distracted. We're trying to multitask. It's not done with bad intent, but that's just how it is. And active listening is extremely powerful, right? This is one of those career superpowers that if you can focus on as a skill to really keep working on developing, is going to stand you in great stead in your career, right? And in your life, not just in your career. But there's so many benefits to active listening. If you do it properly and you do it consistently, it really does boost empathy and your EQ, your emotional intelligence. It builds trust with the other person and makes your relationship stronger. It helps you drive better understanding and clarity and reduce miscommunication and conflict. And it drives much better on open, honest, earnest conversations. So just to round off, okay? So just to recap before I move on to the last couple of slides, this is our mindset shift. Break generational stereotypes and bias. Curiosity, learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? Humility, empathy, and active listening, right? Yeah, you can see my slides okay, yeah, still? Yeah, okay, right. So how do we prepare ourselves for the workplace? So the last couple of main slides I want to share with you all. 2 slides, how to prepare ourselves for the workplace. Finally, how do we thrive when we get there? So I know most of you are still in education. Some of you may have kind of recently graduated, right? But your time in education is really valuable, not just for learning in terms of your degrees or your courses that you're doing in STEM, but to leverage the time in education as a launch pad to really prepare for and land the right job. So these are my key bits of advice for what you need to do. And even if you've left university already, you can still work on this. So it's never too late to start. The first thing, possibly the most important one, and the first one, is to cultivate self-awareness. And I'll talk about the second part in a second. So self-awareness is what your preference is. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you enjoy? Do you want to work with people? Are you good at influencing people? Does that light your fire, right? Or are you not so keen on people generally? And do you prefer to work with things? Do you prefer to work with numbers? Are you creative? So I know this sounds very basic, but a lot of people don't fully have that self-realization and self-honesty or self-awareness of themselves. So have a think about what your preferences are. And the reason that's important as well is that it will help you make better decisions about the career you pursue, right? Because there are careers and jobs and industries that will suit certain personality types and certain desires better than others. And to give you an example of this, my sister is quite a creative person. She's good with numbers. She didn't know she graduated from Cambridge, so she's a very smart girl. But she went to a career in audit in the Big Four, right? Big mistake. She spent like 18 months and she feels she wasted the first 18 months of her career. And if I'd known what I know now, I would have told her, hey, I'm not sure audit is the best fit for your personality type and what you want. But she didn't know that, right? And I think that many students, when I was at university, I didn't know that. But the self-awareness is super important because then you can combine that with knowledge of that you research on the job market, the types of jobs. Now, if you want to get into banking, or you say you want to get into banking, do you actually know what's involved in banking? Do you know what you actually do? Do you know how social it is? Do you know the kinds of work that's involved? Do you genuinely know that? Or do you want to get into banking because it just sounds like a good industry to get into, which is the case when I speak to a lot of students myself. So do your research, speak to people, try and understand the types of jobs, the types of industry knowledge. Now I'm going to combine work experience, volunteering strategically, and joining student organizations as one, because the purpose of them is to develop transferable skills, right? Doing this develops transferable skills that are relevant for the workplace. And there's tons of skills you can learn that you can talk about in a job interview, but you can actually get a head start on integrating into the workplace and doing a good job. So the types of skills that you can learn doing any of these things is so many. So organizational skills, customer service skills, empathy, problem solving, working under pressure, collaborating, working as part of the team. These are all the kinds of things that you'll get doing any of these kinds of activities. And you really will stand out if you can get more of this experience under your belt, and you can articulate and talk about it in an interview as well. Obviously, there's the certification and the hard and technical skills or soft skills that you can pursue as well. And then networking strategically is to be targeted on how and who you network with. Now, some people tell me that introverts, they don't like networking. I'm sorry, in my experience, often a lot of the best networkers, if you push yourself, are actually introverts, because introverts on average are better at listening. And networking is about not just telling, it's about listening. And when I say network strategically, what I mean by that is once you know your personality, you know the types of jobs you're interested in, then you can target people, whether it's through LinkedIn, your network, meet up with people, ask them to be your mentor, go for coffee chats, understand more about the industry, more about the job, see if you can get an internship, see if you can get some work experience through them, see if they can tell you about what they do. This is what I mean by networking strategically. So the last main slide. Once we get to the workplace, how do we thrive? Okay, so this is my model, which I call the fast ABCs model, right? And this is not just about thriving once you get to the workplace. It's actually a model I think is universal, no matter your level. You can apply this at C level. It just manifests a bit differently, right? But it starts with self-awareness, right? So self-awareness, knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your development needs are. How do you impact others? How does your behavior impact others, right? When you presented last week, did people think the presentation was good? Did they find you engaging? Did they find your personality? Did they warm to you? Did they like the subject matter? When you get angry or you feel under pressure, what are your triggers, right? And this is a journey that carries on. But this is self-awareness, and purpose is such a big word, but let me kind of unpack that a bit more. Purpose is kind of, what do you want from life? What lights your fire? So it's a lot of things we talked about earlier. It's like, what do you enjoy? Do you enjoy working with people? Do you enjoy working with children? Do you enjoy working with numbers? But it's also, where do you want to get to in life in your longer term? Yeah. Do you want to retire? Do you have a vision about where you want to retire? But it's also your short-term goals and how these feed in. And if you understand your purpose, both life and as well as work, it's not just work, it's life as well, because what your life goals your work has to fit in with your life goals, right? For example, if you want really nice work-life balance, probably not a good idea to pursue a job in the banking industry, right? In most banking industry jobs, because they're working long hours. My sister works for Goldman Sachs. She works crazy long hours, right? So that's why you need to make sure you're clear around your purpose, right? And then this is something that doesn't stop, it carries on evolving, right? At the top, you see feedback and transform. So feedback, the only way we can really grow is we as human beings have a lot of blind spots, a lot of things we're not aware of. So we need to constantly get feedback. The people that grow the fastest are typically the people that seek feedback proactively and regularly, right? And then they then go on to reflect, think it through, and take action to change, right? Not easy, because you have to sometimes unlearn habits or unlearn ways of working, right? Now, if I just go around the page, I'm going to start actually on business acumen. So business acumen, what does business acumen mean? I also include strategic thinking in it. It's, do you understand the macro picture? So if you work for a company, do you understand the competition environment, the regulatory environment, the macroeconomic trends? There's a lot of talk about tariffs at the moment. Do you know how tariffs are going to impact your business? All right, impact your product lines. And do you understand how your organization makes money? Have you read the annual report? And do you understand how your role and your team's role impacts the strategy? Now, if you understand this stuff, it gives you a massive advantage because you can start to connect the dots between the work that you do and the impact. So you can drive much better impact and you can be much more strategic with how you work. Next, I want to move to stakeholder management and empathy. A lot of what will drive your success in the workplace is the relationship you build and cultivate. And these are not just friendly relationships, although they are that as well. They are relationships that are built on trust, respect, and credibility, right? And so do you understand your stakeholders' needs? Do you understand their style? Do you understand why they think the way they think? Can you adapt to their needs, right? And that's where adaptability comes in, because the world is constantly changing and things are constantly changing. And if you can learn new skills or take on new projects or take on new assignments and show adaptability beyond the set of skills you start with, then you're already ahead as well. And a huge one is ambiguity mastery, right? So in the workplace, I'm not saying there isn't ambiguity in university, there is, but in university, they kind of teach you, and everything's very structured. In the workplace, it's not always it's actually quite rare for it to be very structured. So you get your job description, and your job description is typically written by HR or written by the manager, and they didn't put a lot of work into it. So your job description, the technical document, is not necessarily what you end up doing. You might end up doing a lot of different stuff apart from your job description. And the best people get comfortable with that. And they go, wow, well, that means I can take more responsibility, or I can prove myself and take on new projects. I can help someone out in my team. I can help my boss out who's got this big problem they've got. And then they can start to grow their responsibilities and then put themselves in a great place for promotion. Yeah. And then, of course, communicating effectively, which is again, as I mentioned earlier, this applies at an executive level, and it will all levels, including executive level. What this might mean at an executive level is being able to be very sharp and influence people at board level, which is not what we're asking you to do. But this is why this model is quite universal. And the key thing is this journey never ends. So it's a great model, I think, to keep referring back to as you progress your career. So key takeaways. If you can embrace generational differences in the workplace, you can have smoother integration. You can do this, as we mentioned, by being curious, staying humble, practicing empathy and active listening. Make sure, if you're still at university, use your time as a launchpad for success into the workplace. And you can thrive when you get there by continuously and regularly applying the FAST ABCs model. Thank you. So that's it. And we're going to open up to questions. And I've got my my social media there in case you want to follow me. But over to you all. Any comments, suggestions, questions, challenges, anything? I'm open to any questions you'd like.
Thank you, Allan. That was incredibly insightful, and really appreciate you sharing both, big picture perspective and sort of practical tools that they can actually use to navigate this evolving workplace. So we're going to move into a quick Q&A. If you haven't already, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll try to get through as many in the time we have. We already have a few questions, which I'm going to share with Allan. Aina had dropped 2 questions, which is, how can I, as someone younger, contribute to meetings without being perceived as stepping on someone's toes? Sometimes I have ideas that I want to share, but not sure if I will be seen as inexperienced or overly ambitious. Aina has a second question, which is, how can I best communicate my career goals and expectations in ways that resonate with managers who might be in the older generations? It feels like they have different expectations about job loyalty or growth timelines than I do.
Yeah, there's a two massive questions. So let me give you my best stab at answering them. I'll try the best I can. The first one is an interesting one because there's a couple of things going on there. The first one is, firstly, there's our own sense of lack of confidence and experience sometimes because we're in a situation where there's a lot of experienced people around us. So what many people will often feel is imposter syndrome because they'll be in a room and they'll be the least experienced person in the room, and everyone else will be much more experienced, much more knowledgeable, much more experienced, right? And older. So it can be really intimidating to then come in with a different perspective and to come in and have the confidence. So there's an element of imposter syndrome, but please understand that when you're in the room, you're there because you deserve to be there. So there's a psychological switch you need to make to go, firstly, to go, I deserve to be here because I wouldn't be here if I didn't deserve to be. I came through the process fair and square, how everyone did. And the reality is you bring a fresh perspective that others may not have. One of the big reasons companies want to hire a lot more Gen Z is because Gen Z are reflective of the consumer base, which means people like myself who are sort of older millennials, Gen X, don't really understand how Gen Z think. If we have a marketing team, for example, that's got no Gen Zs or very few Gen Zs, it's not going to be a very good marketing team. Let's be honest. It's going to be a pretty bad marketing team because it's not going to have true empathy and understanding. So you should be confident and try and overcome that psychological barrier around the imposter syndrome. Right? That's the first thing. The second thing is there's some techniques you can use. So it depends on situations, right? So one is to maybe have a quiet word with your manager to build up the confidence to have a quiet word with your manager who, if they're in the room and the side and say, hey, when I'm in team meetings, I'm a little bit shy. Just be honest and open with them. I'm a little bit shy. I'd love to share a bit more, but if your manager isn't already kind of asking you your point of view, would you mind kind of just like making sure, like in the meeting, I would really appreciate it. Do it in a very nice, empathetic way. I know it's not easy, but I'd really appreciate if you could just make sure that you go around the room and just make sure we've got our perspectives and share. But also, so there's that, and then you can just interrupt sometimes, not interrupt, but just make sure you put your point of view and say it with confidence, like because you have a point of view, and it doesn't matter if you're wrong or it doesn't matter if it isn't quite hitting the mark with people. It's still a point of view that you express. It's actually, in my opinion, a bigger risk to stay quiet and not say anything. I really do think that. I think it's important to build up the confidence to start speaking. But there's a couple of ideas there. On the second question, Deepti, that was around the career development of your manager, right?
Yeah, communicating my career goals and aspirations with my manager.
So I think the key, in my opinion, is you need to, and it's the same with any conversation, right? You need to know what your buttons are, and you need to communicate your buttons, but then you need to press the other person's buttons. So you need to know their buttons, right? So I'll tell you now, every time I've had a career development conversation with my manager, I've made sure either in that conversation or before the conversation, I'm talking about their agenda. I'm asking them questions. I'm saying, what is it? What's keeping up at night? What are the biggest challenges? How can I help you? What can I do to solve this for you? Oh, boss, I've noticed that you're having a challenge with this project. Is there anything I can do to help? And it's not waiting for them to ask you. You're asking them. So you're showing you care about them. You're showing you care about their work. You care about their agenda. So already you're putting yourself in a much different place. Now, if you're just going to your boss and you've never had this kind of, you've never said to them, what can I do to help you? Or you're not even aligning your work to their agenda, you're just doing your job and that's it. If you go in and say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, don't get me wrong, some bosses will give you a good career conversation, but some bosses won't, because they'll go, well, what value has this person given to me? So you need to demonstrate value and show you care and show that you can become the ultimate goal, I think, of a good person who does well with their boss is to become their kind of right hand. Almost anticipate their needs to make sure they understand their challenges and their strategy, their goals, and then get ahead of that and support them, even beyond your job description. So that's if you can do that and then have the developmental conversation, it's going to be much more powerful.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Allan. We have a couple more questions, slightly broader. One is from Carlo. Which is about how bureaucracy affects work ethics of an individual within an organization.
How bureaucracy? Okay, that's a very big philosophical question, right? How bureaucracy affects work ethics. I mean, sorry, can I ask, I don't know if the person who asked the question wants to say what they meant by that, because it's quite a broad question. I don't know if they want to say exactly what they
Carlo,
mean.
if you want to add a little more context, feel free to put it in the chat. And meanwhile, I think I can just move to the next question if we can, get something from Carlo by then. Laviva asks, how can we motivate STEM-focused organizations to attract and retain women? I think this might be a very pertinent question to the audience.
I actually don't think, in my experience, there's not a lack of motivation. There's all companies right now, or for a number of years now, have been focused on diversity. I know that with Trump coming in, there's a bit of a different agenda now, but still, there's a big focus on in attracting more women into the workplace, especially in STEM. So that has been a big, in every company I've worked for, and in all the companies my friends work for, that's been a huge focus. I don't think lack of motivation is the problem. I think the bigger challenge is the motivation's there, but the bigger challenge is sometimes the willingness to have honest conversations with ourselves and change. So to make it easier for women in STEM, for example, we need to think about our policies or our benefits a bit differently. We need to make sure our maternity is supported. We need to make sure that the benefits package has been updated, isn't structured for a very male audience, right? And so it's sometimes the policies or procedures or sometimes even lack of flexibility. Sometimes companies, especially now, asking people to come back to the office, are not very flexible for women. And the vogue is to make it much more. You have to be in 4 days, 5 days a week, and stuff like that. And that is a challenge for everyone, but sometimes it's a challenge for working mothers. So it's sometimes a lack of a willingness to engage in an honest conversation or to make the honest and tough choices to make changes, basically.
Thanks, Allan. Conscious of time, Nadia, do let me know. There's still a couple of more questions. So what's your advice for managers who are supervising staff 10 to 20 years older than them? Are there particular touch points to build one's authority and facilitate an effective working relationship while navigating office politics and traditional notions of seniority?
So the question, just to make sure I understand this, Deepti, is around managing people
who are older than them, at least 10 to 20 years. Yes.
Yeah, I don't see. The thing is, managers typically don't. Are you talking from if a Gen Z person is managing an older person? Yeah, I think the number one thing is empathy and understanding, and it goes back to what I said in the presentation. Is empathy, understanding, respect. I think you need to know that person's buttons and be able to press them, right? So you need to be situational, and this is where leadership and developing yourself as a situational leader who treats people fairly, but treats people as individuals. Right, that's very much my leadership philosophy. So I know that if I'm dealing with different personalities, I treat them very different. I treat them quite differently, but I'm fair. You can treat people differently, but be fair. So you have to make sure you get to know them and their preferences enough. But also sometimes you've got to tell them your style and your expectations. So it's a two-way conversation that's built on respect. That's generally the way to do it with anyone. Including older employees or people from a different country who've got a different cultural outlook to yourself.
Thank you, Allan. We're a bit on time. So, Allan, while I'll share the questions with Allan, and if he's able to, respond maybe in chat. Thanks again. Yeah, so you'll be able to see it in the Q&A section, Allan. So thank you again, Allan, for such a thoughtful and eye-opening session. I'm sure you've given a lot for all of us to reflect as we navigate these early careers in such a dynamic workplace. With that, I'll hand it over to Nadia to close the session.
Thank you so much, Deepti and Allan, for an exciting conversation. And actually, Allan, I was reflecting one of the things you said about millennials, me included, and how we've assimilated into the workplace. And so therefore, you don't hear so much about us anymore. But at the same time, I have a lot of hope that for Gen Zs, not only will they assimilate into the workforce, but change it, right? Change it for the better. So I'm really excited to see, as generation becomes a bigger and bigger part of the decision-making portion of the workforce, I think we've got some exciting things kind of ahead of us. And one of the other things you talked about was a little bit on purpose. And I think that also hit the nail right on the head. In a couple of months, we're going to be having another speaker series, and it will be led by Deepti herself, and it's on purpose, the compass for your career. And I like how you talked just now, Ellen, about how purpose is not only you've got to think about your purpose not only in the workplace, but as part of your life purpose. But before that, in a month's time, we'll have a session on women in engineering and leadership. And we have with us the managing director from Artelia, Philippines, Miss Aya Kamari. And so for those of you who are interested in joining some of our sessions later on in the year, please do sign up through the QR codes and stay connected through the newsletter, or if you join the platform. So thank you so much to everyone for your participation today. It always happens, I feel like we kind of run out of time towards the end. We could go on and on talking with you, Alan, and sharing your expertise. So thank you so much. If you're interested in downloading your certificate, and at the same time, we would love to hear from you for you to share with us what kind of topics would you be interested in seeing and hearing from in the next speaker series. So thank you so much from our team at the Asia Foundation, also from Tex and Evolve Careers, and also thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today. So I
Thanks so
think
much.
Alan might, if you might stay a couple of minutes, if there are some other questions that perhaps you can respond to.
I'm flexible. So
Yeah.
if you want to try and answer the other questions, or if anyone wants to kind of chat through, there's no problem at all. I've not got any time. I've not got any pressing commitments.
One of the questions in the chat that I thought was pretty interesting is the question of like, how do you measure success of generational integration within a company? What would you
Yeah.
look for? If, let's say, I'm keen to find a company that values me as a portion of my generation, what kind of indicators could I look at to think, well, this is a company that values everyone?
Yeah, I think you have to be thorough in your research.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, you got to make the first thing is to make sure that you know the company sells products, services, fits in. That's not it's not in conflict, right? Like if you're not,
Mm,
for a basic example, if you don't agree with giving people cancer, then you don't necessarily want to work for a tobacco company, right? But there's a very obvious rudimentary example, but you get my point. So the company's mission, vision, and values have to kind of align, or not, at least not conflict. The
mm,
second thing is there's different kinds of research you can do. You can go onto Glassdoor, obviously, and you can look at employee views. Glassdoor isn't always accurate, but it does give you a dipstick of a sentiment. But you've got to take it also with a little bit of pinch of salt. And then I think it's important to network, honestly, because every company will give you great value statements, great mission
yeah.
statements. They'll say all the right things. They'll say they're inclusive. But the reality is, it really does depend on the company you work for, and the reality it sometimes depends on the manager and the team. So you need to, if there's a company that looks interesting, you need to just try and network as best you can. Even one thing is not just network with people at the company, is network with people who used to work there, right?
I see.
If I know it sounds like a funny one, but if you approach people on LinkedIn, for example, who used to work at a certain company and ask what it was like, I think a lot of people would give you the honest answer. They really would. So I think you just have to do your own research. Now, I know the question isn't necessarily asking this exactly, but we can measure generational trends because companies do run things called engagement surveys. So internally, we can measure employee sentiment, and we can break it down by generation. So that's actually a very common thing that companies do to see where there are generational gaps or differences in terms of engagement or happiness, or things that they care about, basically. So we can measure that, and we did a lot of that in all the companies I've worked at.
Thank you so much, Alan. And if you perhaps we have one last question for you, and this is I guess, a kind of a meta question shared by an anonymous attendee. But are Gen Z and managerial characteristics and expectations culturally universal? I mean, for you, Alan, you shared that you've worked all around the world. So do you see any differentiation across cultures or countries, or are Gen Z pretty equal across the geographic area?
Yeah, so this is where it's very intersectional and very complex. The reality is, if you take a typical people manager in the UK, for example, and a typical people manager in Singapore or in Indonesia, even if they're the same generation, there are some consistencies between how they will think, right? One thing that's consistent, for example, I found, because I've worked with many people managers in all those countries, is that they value loyalty, they want hard work, respect, they treat people the same. If they're a good manager, most managers will treat people the same and be very consistent, right? So that is very consistent, I found. What is not consistent is sometimes the philosophy of how you manage, right? In the UK, we are much more likely, or kind of Anglo-Saxon people are much more likely to treat people with a lot more, I say trust. What I mean by that is you will give someone a task, they will go away and do it, and you won't necessarily go and micromanage that person. You'll trust them to get on and do the work, and then you will see them very much as an adult to say, hey, if they need help, they come to me for help. I don't need to go and check in with them every day to see, do you need help? What can I help you with? I trust you to be an adult and come to me. That's kind of the very much the British view, right, of how you manage someone. When I've worked with not all managers in Singapore, but sometimes ones more in Indonesia or Malaysia or in Singapore, there's much more of a, hey, you need to report to me regularly on what the work you're doing. I need to see the work. And I wouldn't say it's less trust. It's just a different way of working. It just means they want to see much more the results as you deliver the results. Whereas I think in the UK, we're much more like, hey, go and do it, figure it out, and then come and tell me what you think, right? It's a different philosophy, different way of thinking. And again, it's different in Japan. In Japan, it's much more regimented. It's much more, there's much more command and control. In Singapore, managers sometimes, occasionally, will still ask you, "What do you think? What do you think?" to you. In Japan, not very common, right? It's much more the manager will tell you what to do, and they won't really ask your opinion. You just do what the manager tells you, right? So there's different cultural nuances, basically, I would say, from that perspective.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. And yeah, I definitely agree that it's an intersectionality of so many things. And especially when we're talking about women in STEM, there's an added gender dimension also, in addition to culture, in addition to, age or generation. So
Can I also say one more thing
Yes,
as well, Nadia, on that?
sure.
On STEM, one watch out I have, and this is an important watch out for those of you who are still on the call. And this, I'm going to talk very generally, so I don't want to offend anyone. But what I found in STEM, I found people in STEM, including managers, are much more black and white, how they see the world, right? They will see the world and see things with less gray. So it can be hard sometimes to have a conversation with someone who's very black and white in the way they think, because I don't think that way. So personally, one of the things I struggle with is when I talk to someone who's very black and white, who doesn't see much, who doesn't really care for or see nuance. And I think that when you have an engineering mindset or a STEM mindset, you're much more like, give me the specific data, facts, and if you don't give me the data and facts, it's wishy-washy. So that's the kind of typical, stereotypical view, but it is actually quite true a lot of the time. So that can be challenging.
Yeah, and I guess it then rolls back to one of the first things you talked about. It's the empathy gap, right? Like where, at the end of the day, if we're trying to bridge any divide, we've got to think about the empathy, the gap, and kind of move ourselves a little bit forward through things like you shared with us today, self-awareness, curiosity, and kind of approaching
Exactly.
the issue with humility. So with that, I thank you again, Alan, for your time. For those of you who would like to follow him on Instagram, and on And TikTok, please do follow him. And Patrick will be resharing the link to the response, or like the survey. So please do give us your feedback too. So thank you very much, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.